Thank you for the introduction. I guess you can see from my bio that I've been working on issues related to youth civic engagement and social innovation for a very, very long time, although no need to reveal my age. We have a great panel, and I just wanted to thank the audience because I know when you stay for the very last panel, these are really the loyal crowds who come to conferences. So thank you all for sticking this through. And we have a wonderful panel of social entrepreneurs and activists, and also a wonderful journalist. So we have Joyce Karam, who is a journalist for The National. We have Shadi Khalil, who's the founder of a social enterprise called Greenish. We have Sami Hourani, who I've been wanting to meet for many, many years, who's the founder of Fursa.
Likewise.
And we have Yasmin Majali, who founded a social enterprise called Baby Fist in Palestine, in a very difficult part of Palestine, which is Gaza. I wanted to start the conversation with just a very general, candid observation. I can say this because I've been working in the field for a very, very long time. Whenever we have a Middle East conference, we always have to talk about youth. And we always have to talk about youth being the largest part of our population, but also youth and jobs and youth and job creation, highest youth unemployment rates probably in the world, with female youth unemployment rates being actually the highest in the world. But on this panel, we have these incredible pockets of hope. But yet we still don't see, with everything that's happening, especially in recent times with protests coming up again, and this new surge of young people starting social enterprises, we don't see governments really partnering with youth or really embracing them as an asset. We continue to see this discourse of youth are a problem. But you're all coming up with these amazing solutions. So I'd love to start this conversation with, what are your thoughts on where are we in the region? What's happening? What is happening with young people? We're seeing protests in Lebanon, in Iraq. We saw some protests in Egypt. And we're seeing every day, I hear of a new social enterprise being created. So share with us what's going on. Shadi, would you like to start?
Yes. For me, I think it's more about how now communication is so easy. Now it's easy to catch, and like anything that's happening maybe in Tunis, then it's going to pass to Egypt, then it's going to pass to Lebanon, and just the flow and how it transmits through us. We growing up, before 25th of January, growing up for us, there was a lot of things that we didn't hope that's going to be changed. But after the revolution, I think we have managed to break the stereotype, and now the possibilities are so open, and it feels that we can do so many things. I think this is why there's a lot of momentum.
So you think that youth feel that there is a moment for them to actually have agency and create change?
Yes, that change is possible, right. Yes.
Wonderful. Sami?
Well, first I would like to thank you for hosting me on this panel, and thank you for the Middle East Institute. It's a matter of energy. I mean, as you know, the Middle East and North Africa has the highest number of youth population in the world, but it also has the highest number of unemployed youth who are basically just full of energy, and this energy is just moving from one side to another. And I think those protests and what we're seeing in the demonstrations is basically a way of getting this energy out. And the momentum when it comes to entrepreneurship and social enterprises, it's also another way. And here we're talking about maybe it's kind of a new bubble that young people are trying to have for themselves, where they feel the freedom, where they feel the agility, where they feel the impact of the entrepreneurship. And that's maybe something that they're creating around themselves, or a new system that at some point will burst and become the new system of the area. And you can see what's happening in Lebanon.
Yeah. Joyce?
Yeah, thank you.
And
Thanks.
You've been writing about this for a long time, so.
Writing right now as well.
I was going to say thank you for counting me among the young leaders, youth leaders. But yeah, I've been writing about this for a long time. I just got back from Lebanon a couple of weeks ago. And I think what you see on the ground is the reality that you hear it from the protesters themselves. They're fed up. with the system. They're fed up with leaders who have been promising them the same thing for decade after decade after decade after decade. I mean, whether in Lebanon or Iraq, this is the post-war generation. This is the post-Saddam Hussein. They're not running a Ba'athist revolution, and they're not running also an anti-Syria or anti-Iran uprising when you talk about Lebanon. I think Dr. Hrani mentioned it, the unemployment figures. You're looking at 37% unemployment in Lebanon among youth. And I think that's definitely an understatement. It's
70, not 7, maybe 70?
No, 37.
37.
37, that was in 2017. When you look at Iraq, you're looking at 22% under poverty line. People are just fed up. And, the slogan, the people want the downfall of the regime. It's not like they're looking at they have a vision of what is next, but they just lost trust in a political system that has failed them over and over and over again. And speaking about bubbles, I think, there is the bubble of the governments in those countries, but there's also a bubble in Washington that doesn't look at this as the problem. No, we want to make this against Iran or against someone else when it's not. It's a very organic, it's a very natural movement. It's truly inspiring. I think Nadine Labaki spoke about this yesterday here.
Yeah.
It's so inspiring when you're in small towns in North Lebanon and you see people of all ages just go out and protest.
Yep. I'm Egyptian, so we live this. I completely understand how inspiring it is. But I'm going to come back and ask you a question about that. But I'd love to hear from Yasmin. What are your thoughts on where the region is with regards to youth?
Is this working? Okay. I can't speak for the region. Just because I think the region is so big and diverse, and there's so many things happening uniquely to specific parts of each country. But for Palestine, and even more specifically the West Bank, I can say that this generation of Palestinians is different than any other generation because we are seeing, capitalism at its peak. We are seeing state violence all over the world in a way that we've never seen before. And we're also seeing the way that all of that is interconnected. Nothing is isolated. So what's happening in Palestine is connected to what's happening in the US and into Europe and in other countries like Saudi, for example, that all have a hand in exactly what's happening in Palestine. And so this generation has an awareness of the way that everything is interconnected. So the personal is deeply political, the personal is deeply economic, it's deeply social, and so on and so forth. And so our solutions for change reflect that, right? They reflect that complexity. And so our solutions are combining business and ethics, combining business and social change, combining business and politics in a way that I don't think any other generation has tried to do before. So personally, on the ground in Palestine, I can say that that's we're trying to problem solve within that context and with that mindset.
Thank you, Yasmin. So Joyce, I want to come back to you because I think you touched upon these common threads that exist between Lebanon, Iraq, and also I would say most countries in the Middle East, which is this deep frustration that youth have, not just with unemployment, but with the overall political situation, the economic situation, the social situation. And when I think back to 2009, I think it was, or 2010, when Tariq Youssef wrote the book Generation in Waiting, and here we are in 2019, and it's still a generation in waiting, is deeply concerning. But yet I have to go back and say that these protests are organic, but as you have commented on in your own writing, they are not necessarily organized, and nor do they have a leader. So what is the end result of this particular manifestation of youth participation, which comes in the form of protests? Where do you think this will lead for countries like Lebanon? because I think, I speak to friends in Lebanon often, and the enormous hope reminds me of the enormous hope that we had back in 2011 in Egypt, and many of us, have lost a lot of that hope. So what is the future looking like for you when it comes to Lebanon?
Well, Dina, part of the beauty of it, it's unpredictable. And its uncertainty and its trajectory. So we really don't know. Anybody who can tell you, Iraq is gonna move to an open democracy, or if Lebanon is gonna become secular. No, they don't know. Nobody knows. We're watching big events unfold, whether it's in Beirut or Baghdad or Tripoli or Hermel or Basra. All over these places. The common theme is, for now, economic. That they do want better anti-corruption laws. For example, in Lebanon, you may need anti-nepotism laws, when now the main gridlock in Lebanon is about the president's son-in-law. I know this is now common because we have in the U.S. The president. In-laws, maybe they're meeting, and we have the Turkish president here with his in-law. So, but in Lebanon, it's begging a different question. So you may see moving in direction of anti-corruption laws or better governance. I don't see a common political theme across the board, because, for example, in Iraq, you do hear anti-Iran chants. In Lebanon, in certain areas, perhaps those that are considered Hezbollah strongholds, you do see a pushback against Hezbollah, but there is no anti-Iran narrative, for example, in Lebanon. So again, the beauty of it, it's organic, it's evolving, we check it, hour by hour, we're looking at, where they're going next, what are they drawing, the murals, the street art that they're coming up with. And this is so new for both Baghdad and Beirut. Baghdad, you're talking about, for decades, they've been suffocating under Saddam Hussein, and then the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So this is just fascinating in how new and organic it is. And in Beirut, we've had the Syrian presence till 2005, and we saw the Cedar Revolution then, but we've never seen. I've protested in Lebanon in the 90s, but it wasn't like this. This is just national. You only see Lebanese flags, and it's cross-sectarian. So maybe we come here again and see where things are.
We'll make sure that MEI puts that on next year's agenda. Sammy, I wanted to go to you because, following up on the idea of youth participating through protests, in Jordan, you created a platform called Diwani Debates and Fadfad. So in English, for those who don't speak Arabic, Fadfad is the word for venting. And this has become letting out, all your concerns. This has become a fairly large platform that allows youth to express their concerns. What has that done for youth in Jordan? And also, how has that led to any change? Or is it enough that it's a platform that allows youth to discuss and debate and reflect on where they are and where the issues in their country
The nice thing is that sometimes you give the answer, so it makes it easier on me. Well, let me introduce Diwaniya first. Diwaniya, as you said, it's a debate platform. The idea was to go to public spaces and to occupy the public spaces with debate platforms. So not with an agenda, but with an open debate on having both sides. And the idea also to come to public spaces and redefine the public spaces and give them the label of social, political, economic talks. It started as a small idea with small debates with 10, 20 people, and then start expanding to have more than 1,500 debating in a public space. And the public space, it can be a park, it can be a venue beside the street, just the public spaces, which is very scarce, by the way, in Jordan, and that's something that we would like to work on. But the idea is to instill the concepts of debate, which is arguments, numbers, statistics, away from going into emotions, equal participation from both sides. And that was the importance of the 1 year. The second thing that was important is getting the decision makers and experts to the street, away from the five-star hotels, away from the fancy political salons where only specific people are invited, where the ordinary citizens are just marginalized and isolated. So Diwaniyya is just an open platform. You would find people from different socioeconomic classes, different education levels, face to face with decision makers. And as a matter of fact, one of the decision makers who were on the Diwaniyya platform was the current Prime Minister of Jordan, Dr. Omar Razaz, and the ex-spokesperson of the government, Jumaal Ghnemat. So a lot of the decision makers participated in the debate of Diwaniyya. Why would we involve decision makers and current decision makers? Because we want to put focus on the concept of social accountability. And I think without social accountability, there is no change. Whether right now, whether with the protests, with any tools, any methodologies, what we need to instill is the concept of accountability, where any government, even private sector, is accountable to what they're doing, to their policies, to their executive power that we have given them. And that was the idea of Diwaniyya, just getting the decision makers to the street, directly with people, whoever they are, and let them hold them accountable. Start growing that feeling, that sense of accountability among decision makers. I don't want to put it in the sense of fear from people, but the idea of at least you feel that you have, sometimes we say that we grill our decision makers on the Diwaniyya platform. It's not grilling, but at least giving them the idea that you're accountable to the decisions and promises. So this is the Diwaniyya. Fatwid is...
Do they feel accountable?
They feel,
when they come?
Because first of all, they would not expect the big number of people, which is something that sometimes I would say it's tricky, because we tell them, oh, it's going to be a youth debate, blah, 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 and then they see 1,000 people from different walks of life, and they don't repeat it again. So that's so we keep switching decision makers. When you see the crowd and when you see the questions, I remember one of the crowd members in one of the debates, it was directly with the mayor of Amman. And he stood up and he said, "You are a dictator," in front of everyone. So nothing happened to the guy, just to put everyone rest assured. But the idea for a decision maker, of the mayor of Amman, to have just an ordinary citizen, he used to be an owner of a coffee shop, to tell him that you're a dictator, because simply he took a decision without involving them, and that decision affected their economic situation. He had to accept it and to defend himself why he's not dictator, or at least listen that some people can tell him a dictator or call him a dictator in front of everyone. So going just swiftly to Fatwid, it's kind of like a simple idea where we put white papers in public spaces with the specific questions, asking people to answer those specific questions. It's a way of collecting the public opinion offline and the direct public opinion. It started just like a way to vent out, and then it got developed to become more of like a public polling methodology, or a qualitative research methodology, where we could collect big number of comments and answers in a very short time. So in a protest, instead of distributing surveys or doing interviews, you put the papers, and it got documented and registered at Lund University as a new way of doing research, under the name of venting out or letting
No,
it
I
out.
love it. I wish it could be done in Egypt. It's great. But speaking of Egypt, Shadi, you started this amazing social enterprise, and your company is actually a part of Thrive, which is an initiative of my company, Ahead of the Curve. But I have to say, issues related to waste and environment have been issues that have been discussed in Egypt for decades. And we have not gotten to necessarily any positive space. So I'd love to hear from you why you decided to enter this space, knowing that issues of solid waste in particular is very politicized. why you started this, and why is it different, and why is it doing so well?
Well, I started this because learning about the impact of solid waste management and actually the gap it has in Egypt and the effect on the communities in terms of income, health, and also the issues of climate change and how it's going to affect the community. The community in Egypt has always been attacked as undereducated, that does not care about the environment. But fact is they are suffering from climate change, they are suffering from environmental issues, but they are not aware of it. They are unable to label it. And this is why we felt obliged that we need to start Greenish from the first place in order to work with the community. From the day that we have started, we have had the community support because we have engaged them. We didn't go with a certain debate claiming that the North Pole is going to melt. We directly speak to the people of the issues that they are actually going through, and this is why.
So when you say community, who do you mean?
I mean communities in Egypt with their differences, communities around the Red Sea, communities of like different races in Egypt, because Egypt is not one unity like it's presented to be. Communities around the Nile with their culture and how it's affected by climate change, communities in Delta and how the agriculture is actually affected by they are unable to plant crops that they actually used to plant for years and years. Farmers are leaving their lands. There's a lot of impact of climate change. Alexandria also is getting affected by the rise of the Mediterranean. So there's a lot of impact that people are feeling, but they are unable to associate it with environmental issues and climate change. And this is where we stepped in. A huge part of why we are doing so good that we decided to engage the youth in public spaces. And this was a magic recipe. We have invited youth to go out in the Nile and to volunteer to clean the Nile out of plastic. And it was a crazy idea, and we, on the day of the event, we found hundreds of people who came. The next month, we had thousands of people in the Nile, and people continued to join and join. We have 20,000 people lining up right now at this moment to join and be part. When we did more of research work, why they participate, it was about the lack of access to public spaces, of the feeling of community, of a higher purpose, of being part of something bigger, of meeting new people, of communicating, because this space is not available, is not accessible anymore. And this is why they're stepping in.
So just a quick follow-up question. Do you think that that Greenish would have been this successful without the revolution that happened in 2011? Or do you think that that revolution allowed youth to really believe that they could, as we said, create change? And can you connect it back to that at all?
I feel, even on a personal level, I wouldn't have founded Greenish if it was not for the revolution, because it's very personal for me to take a choice and jump of faith. Like this happened inside of me during the revolution, and it's technically what made me start Greenish from the first place. It's not necessarily to advocate for a certain political agenda, but just this personal revolution that maybe I felt inside of me is what made me start Greenish and quit my job and decide that I want to do something different. And I think also a lot of people who do, this story is very common in Egypt. Like a lot of people quit their job after the revolution. They decided that they want to work in development, that they want to have a different hope and to change. The more the sphere is getting closed and closed, the more the spaces are getting limited. I think there's resilience that maybe you are able to fight, maybe in different means. Maybe in environmental means, maybe in so many different, maybe in entrepreneurship, maybe in improving other people's life in terms of economical impact. But we are definitely fighting. Maybe we are not protesting right now, but we are fighting in different ways.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come back with a follow-up question to that, but I want to move to Yasmin because you started, I did not know about Baby Fiston. When I read about it, I thought, this is amazing. And the one question that I had was, you're using one of the strongest tools that have been used to objectify women, which is fashion, to do the exact opposite, which is to support women and provide them with economic support. I'd love to hear from you why you started this, how this evolved, And how are you managing this in Gaza while being based in Ramallah? That's real dedication and sign of a true activist, I think, in social entrepreneurs. So would love to hear your thoughts behind that.
Thank you. It started as a feeling, not necessarily a conscious train of thought, but as a feeling that the personal was deeply political. Over time, it became increasingly difficult not to notice the way that my body was being used as a site of oppression under not just patriarchy, but occupation. This poster child of feminist intersection. And so, as we grow up thinking that our clothes send a message, right? What you choose to, when you wake up and you go to your closet, what you select that day says who you are to the world. And oftentimes, instead of using your clothes to express yourself, when you're exposed to constant threat on the streets, in the workplace, in the home, you start to use your clothes as a means to protect yourself, maybe even to minimize your presence while you're walking on the street, so you hear just that many less catcalls. And for someone who loves fashion and loves expression and loves creativity, this was really heartbreaking when I realized that I was attempting to hide myself, and then I started to ask questions like, well, why is this happening? Why do I feel this way? And eventually you start noticing the larger systemic structures of oppression that operate at the local level, the social level, but also at the larger level of Israeli military occupation. And so the question became, how do I use my body to transform it from a site of oppression to a site of resistance, right? So flipping that power structure to reclaim the thing that was stolen from me, and clothes very much were the tool for that. And I think the reason that fashion can be so dismissed as something maybe shallow or what have you is just because it's largely feminist in its essence, right? Women, 70% of garment workers in the world are women. Most designers are women. And we do have this intrinsic fascination with clothing and expression. And that's why I think it's so easily dismissed, and why it's so easy for the patriarchy to just step in and try to use it to objectify us. And that's another part of it, is flipping that power structure. And so slowly the clothes broke those barriers between the social and the political and the economic, especially when we decided to start producing our clothing in Gaza, which is basically an open air prison. And it's arguably definitely the worst place to live in Palestine under Israeli military occupation. It's been under siege for over a decade. And one aspect of that is that the textile industry is only 13% of what it used to be, right? It used to be thriving, and now it's nothing. So for example, if I want to bring a new shipment of jackets that we have just made from Gaza to Ramallah, this is technically 4 hours away by car. It takes up to 2 weeks to arrive because of checkpoints, because Israel settler colonial politics just makes movement for us that difficult. And so in essence, the clothes that we end up producing and wearing and distributing among Palestinian society are a symbol of resistance to Israeli attempts to control our movement and spatial dynamics amongst Palestinian people. And so just that was a really long answer to your question, but yeah.
I mean, you spoke to my soul, and I'm sure you spoke to many women in this room. And I will definitely come back to you, but and there are a lot of questions coming in, a lot of questions also for Joyce about protests. But before doing that, before switching to some of the questions from the audience, Sami, I know you're a serial entrepreneur, and I really appreciate that. So in addition to all of the other things that you started, you also started Fursa. And Fursa really touches upon a very crucial issue for the Middle East, which is employability. Not necessarily employment, but employability, and youth understanding whether or not they're actually qualified to apply for a particular job, or they have the skills that are required, and how they can get those skills. And I find that extremely interesting that you focused on this issue of employability, while so many of us are focusing on the issue of job creation. Can you just tell us very, very quickly, why you chose to focus on that issue, why Forza, and that is also now scaling. You have 1 million people using that platform right now. That is a great number.
Well, Forza means opportunity in English, and the idea was, we talked about political changes and social changes that we need, but the essence of it is economic needs. And in order to get to the job market, the idea was that there is some sort of elitism, where there are a vicious cycle of elitism, where some people have access to quality education, and that quality education is getting them into the job market with its associated skill set and so on. So the idea was that there are so many people who are alienated from being able even to enter the job market because of the lack of quality of their education, which is the common denominator among the Middle East and North Africa. And here where Forza came, where it's an opportunity for people to break this vicious cycle and try to get into employability or employment, whether as employees or as entrepreneurs. But we need to get them more qualified. So the idea was to come up with a comprehensive cascade that starts with helping them discovering their passion and discovering what they are through a specialized artificial intelligence-based psychometric test that helps them to discover what they want, what specialties that they can go into, then escorting them through the whole process, filling the educational gaps that they have, getting them the employability skills that they might need, which might be pretty simple here in the US, like CV writing or even personal statement writing, cover letter writing. Cover letter writing is not something that we ever studied in the Arab world. We were never trained how to write a personal statement, unless I'm coming from a different world, guys.
Wasta letter.
Yeah, or wasta letter. You need to switch to Joyce.
I'm going to switch. She has about 10 questions.
So, escorting them from building their skills towards getting them experiences and practical experience, because also we have another vicious cycle, which is access to experience. And without getting an experience, you cannot enter the job market. And here where we connect young people to internships and opportunities where they can get experiences. So this comprehensive cascade, we do it online using technology, trying to break those cycles of elitism through the growing penetration of internet and usage of technology. And that's why we have 1 million. Honestly, not because we're too smart, it's just we're satisfying a big need, and it's people are just using it.
Yeah. I've been working on this social entrepreneurship for almost a decade now, and I feel like the three of you, and in a way, you, Joyce, when you talked about the protest, I've been saying all the time that social entrepreneurship is just another form of resistance, right? So in this big space we call youth civic engagement, it doesn't always have to come in the form of a protest or a street riot. And I think what you've demonstrated through the work that you're doing is that social entrepreneurship is also an extremely valid and important form of resistance to the dysfunctionalities that come from governments and society alike, right? So we have a lot of questions. There's one that I particularly want to bring up because it hasn't been something that is addressed. There's a question that says, any thoughts or comments that you have on the status and trends relative to the youth in Saudi, UAE, Oman, or Yemen? We typically don't hear about these countries, which is true. So any thoughts from all of you?
Thoughts
on what is happening with youth in Saudi Arabia or Yemen or Oman or
in Yemen? We can
Yasmin, I see you.
Yemen is very.
I can't speak to that, to be honest. I think even with countries that are closer to Palestine, even bordering Palestine, the only way, and having read so much literature about مثلا Masr, reading so much about it, I can never really understand what's happening unless I'm there. And then with Saudi, Yemen, or Oman, those are such unique situations for each one. I can't venture anything.
Yeah.
I mean, Yemen, you have the fear of, the radicalization of the youth. whichever side of the conflict you're on, and that's a big threat. I mean, but when you talk about Saudi, I think we're seeing, a bigger desire for change. What we see in videos coming from concerts, whoever is, coming in now, is just people are celebrating this moment. At the same time, you do have activists, women activists, that have been jailed for, over a year now. So there is also a fear of, speaking up, how much you can speak up. The UAE, I think, because they do have much lower unemployment rates than others. They are seen as, I think the Arab Youth Survey is when they ask youth where they want to live. I think UAE does
right up
come
on
up.
the top.
It's up on the top. Oman, I think Ambassador Farsi might be more skilled in answering this question, but
It's always
it's an interesting case. They do have some economic challenges now, but I don't know enough about its youth.
Yeah. Do either of you want to comment on that, or can we move on?
I'm just going to talk about Saudi Arabia because we're seeing a rise in the number of users in Forza.com, because we put a lot of those international opportunities, training opportunities, fellowships, and educational opportunities. Before 2-3 years ago, we didn't have a lot of users from Saudi Arabia. Now, with the openness, the desire to travel, to learn more, we're seeing more.
We're seeing more.
Yeah. So that's also a good sign that things are hopefully changing.
I agree. Joyce, another question for you. How long will a leaderless protest movement in Lebanon last? Do you believe Lebanese protests are being politicized internally? Protesters.
How long a leader?
How long do you think a
last.
leaderless protest can last in Lebanon?
They've lasted more than anyone has anticipated so far. And, if the void continues, if we don't see any form of government or a government that's more of the same, the bet is that they will continue. Whether it's in Tripoli, whether it's in Tyre, whether it's in Beirut, Shtura, you are seeing big crowds just go to the streets. Even, I keep saying this, but small towns and suburban areas in Lebanon. These people don't wake up every day and just write, slogans and say, "Oh, we're gonna go protest the government," but they are, because the economic situation is untenable, and as long as that continue, you will continue to see protests, whether they're 15,000 people in Tripoli or 50 people in Matan or Jbeil or other places. But you have a problem that has gone unresolved for a long time now, and there are no serious solutions yet on the table to address it. Mm-hmm. And to just, I want to, just the environmental aspect of this is also, you see it in both protests in Iraq and in Lebanon. Iraq, you had the Basra water crisis that was throughout 2018 that triggered protests. In Lebanon, you had the garbage crisis, the You Stink, the You Stink movement that's, that, came out. And
we remember, I was actually in Lebanon during that time.
so you do, this is why it's, this is just not a simple one-sided, one aspect, one cause, one protest. It's you have environment, you have economics, you have some politics, of course, it's involved. For example, in Tripoli, they do want a lot of the prisoners from the Islamist prisoners that were arrested. That was a clear demand that they do want them released. So it's multi-layered, and my bet it will continue
Yeah.
until you do see a political formula that answers these protests.
Yeah, jump right in, Yasmin, go ahead.
I want to add that I think the question is like insinuating that it needs a leader in order to be successful, and I completely disagree with that. And if I'm wrong in assuming that, please forgive me. But I think the Lebanese people are rioting in the way that they are because they do not want a leader, because they have been just led by single self-serving individuals for so long. This is actually, I would argue that it's not leaderless, but it's like we're living in a world now where we're not supposed to be identifying individuals to glorify and represent an entire movement. There are people who are organizing various things, the human chain, the yoga in the streets. That means someone had to come up with the idea and then disseminate it, right? So there are leaders that we're not seeing. They're invisible and they want to stay that way, and they should stay that way. Angela Davis makes a very good argument for this. MLK, Nelson Mandela, they were not singular leaders of these revolutions. They were working within this larger network of individuals who worked really hard to make change happen. And that's happening in Lebanon. And I have to say, it's happening in Hong Kong. They're refusing to identify who is the 1 or 2 or 3 people who are leading this, because it's not. It's a people's revolution. That's just my 2 cents.
Well, why don't you keep the mic, because there are a few questions for you too. So there is very fast questions. Where can people buy Baby Fist products?
You can buy Baby Fist at www.baby-fist.com. And we also have an Instagram page.
And then also the other question is, how is Baby Fist engaging with Palestinian society more broadly, other than through clothes? And do you have any other initiatives that you're leading through Baby Fist?
That's a really great question. Yeah, so the biggest part that I did not mention in my earlier was that we use the funds to carry out menstruation campaigns for 5th and 6th grade girls across the West Bank. So we host workshops to educate these girls about menstruation specifically, understanding that this specific topic dismantles a larger framework of taboo around women's bodies and by extension their voices. And so this is something we've been doing for the last year, and now we're partnered with other local organizations to expand our reach. So this is what we're doing to access other parts of society, because we understand that clothing is not necessarily something that's accessible or in and of itself going to initiate change.
Okay, great. And Shadi, and because I know we have to wrap up soon, a question for you is, what is the roadmap for achieving environmental sustainability in the region? Many people predict that issues related to environment are going to be, like Joyce said, will be a major source of conflict. So you really succeeded in mobilizing youth in Egypt, but what is the roadmap for turning this into something much more sustainable, not just in Egypt, but beyond?
We are trying to mobilize different groups. Youth is only us as people. We have a purchasing power, yes, we have a say, but still a huge burden fall on governments and corporates. Yeah. Especially being here, with the pull out from Paris Agreement, which is refusing for the United States to reduce its emissions, with American companies going to our countries and actually abusing resources. Not only this, I have one interesting story is we were in Germany and we were having people from South Africa, and someone was saying something related to incubation to South Africa, and someone of the South Africans said it's still existing. I was kicked out of my house because of mining. My entire family house and our graveyard was taken because of mining from a German company in our country. So it still exists in different forms. So there need to be a responsibility, as our governments need to be responsible to protect our resources, to protect our livelihood, and also to stop calculating environmental cost in terms of money. People's health, quality of life is not about money. We have been hearing about income and money, economic growth in terms of money. What about quality of life? What about our health? How can we calculate health and quality of life with money? Who decides this? Our policymakers. So rules and regulation need to be very firm. We need to measure our progress in a different way than economic growth and money. There's a lot of series and there's a lot of debate related to degrowth and how we need to progress. Capitalism and socialism are not the only two options. We need to innovate economically with different models, respecting our health, resources, and the future of this planet.
Yeah, could not agree more. And actually, panelist from the former panel, Dalila Khalid, is doing a lot of work on environment. You should grab her after. So one question to all of you, and very quick answers, and then I'll wrap up. There is a question that says, what can the US do to further support Arab youth? And you can also say nothing, if you want, you know.
I'm going to address this to like the general U.S. public, and by that I mean white people. I hope that by supporting, I hope that in order to support us, you take the following advice. Always flip the mirror that you are using to try and view the Middle East and flip it back onto yourself. Any issue that you see going on there is happening in this country at the same level, if not worse. Patriarchy, corruption, capitalism, so on and so forth. And so you can support us by flipping the mirror back onto yourselves and then using that to empathize with the situation and universalize anything that's happening. That's my advice.
Joyce.
Yeah, I mean, who in the U.S.? It's I think, you know, for the U.S. media, please cover the protests. For the U.S. government, I guess don't make this about you. This is the one time we heard the State Department tweet a video with Secretary Pompeo. It was all about Iran. This is just don't make it about your policy. And I think for the U.S. People, you know, public, stay engaged. You know, just follow this story. I know it's miles and miles and miles away, but this is history happening, no matter where it takes to.
Sami.
Well, away from politics, I'm going to zoom into the U.S. aid to the region. And here maybe we need to, and one of the things that I would ask the U.S. government to start investing in new tools and methodologies and investing more in the infrastructure. So and put more attention to the effectiveness and the efficiency of that aid that has been pouring into the region, and try to make it more sustainable and more efficient.
For me, I would second everyone what you all said, but I would focus also on corporates, on American corporates in our region, and that we need to understand this responsibility, need to extend to our region. We need to understand that a lot of American corporates are exploiting a lot of resources and are actually harming a lot of people. Big companies are actually banning media and news, and actually contributing to the lack of freedom of expression in our countries. So companies that actually operating here from the United States need to abide to the rules still in our countries.
Yeah.
I have one thing to add.
You can add your one thing, and because I'd like to wrap up because we're out of time. I would just thank you all for your comments, and this has been a beautiful panel for me. I think you're all doing amazing, amazing work. So I'd like to end panels on very, very positive notes. So if we could just, starting with Shadi, if you could just end by saying, what are you most hopeful about as a young person in the Arab world, or working on youth issues in the Arab world? Very, very quickly, because as you can see, we need to wrap up.
This is a very tough question to have like in one sentence. But
you can do it.
Like for me, it would be actually having this moment that we can all be out in public spaces, expressing and actually knowing that we will not be harmed, that we have freedom to dream and actually to pursue these dreams in our homeland and our countries. Yeah.
Sami.
Actually, what makes me hopeful is the young people of the region, the energy, the talents that's there. And I'm going to go back to the sentence. It's a call for the American companies we're living right now in a globalized economy. You can hire, you can get in touch with our human resources. They're ready, they're tech savvy, they're excited to work from abroad, and they have good internet connection.
Joy.
I think the interconnectedness of the movement, and that people are not afraid anymore. I think this gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. Yasmin, finale. Make it a good one.
No,
I want to say just what I'm not so hopeful. But I would like this to happen before my lifetime comes to an end. I am hoping that the increased awareness and increased solidarity movements for Palestine are successful, and that we will have a free Palestine.
Thank you.